I decided at 16 that the way that I was going to beat my father, I was going to build a bigger business than my dad, and that became a quest for me. I was the first woman to list a company on the NASDAQ ever. I come from the Manawatu. I'm a farm girl. I've created about 8,500 jobs, operated my companies into 97 countries around the world, and I've started multiple companies, raised about $350 million and created just under $1 billion in value. But most people look at the constraint and then say, well, it can't be done. Where my father's view was, actually, anything can be done. You basically have to create that. But I'm not trying to say I'm going to change the world. I'm saying this is how the world is. Now let me take that and figure out how it can make it work for me. I absolutely love life. I love creating, and that's what gives me my energy. So I tell you about this formula where you can get anything you want. It's called the jelly bean formula. You can use it to get a job. So I told her about the formula. It's very, very straightforward. Would you like to hear the formula?
Today's conversation is incredible. I talked to Linda Jenkinson, who's built multiple businesses to 9-figure exits. You heard me correctly, that's more than $100 million. She's done that successfully from New Zealand into the States and Silicon Valley. She has so much energy and so much insight to share. She delves deep into formulas and methods of going about building businesses. She's so generous with her insights and her knowledge. And she also talks about some upcoming books and some courses which could be of interest to you. So stick around and enjoy the ride. And so, LJ, I'm really excited to have you here today. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I always like to start these conversations with a bit of a backstory. So we've dug up some research, but I'm not going to give anything away. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience, please, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Well, I was the first woman to list a company on the NASDAQ ever, CEO, founder. I come from the Manawatu. I'm a farm girl. I've created about 8,500 jobs, operated my companies into 97 countries around the world, and I've started multiple companies, raised about $350 million US, and created just under $1 billion in value. I love building things. I'm a gun poker player. I'm a mother. I've got quite a few children and a husband, partner, and I'm a global citizen. So, yeah.
That's a great high-level sprinkling of a range of things. I'd like to delve into the very origin story if I can. So, farm girl from the Manawatu. So I hail from farming stock myself, so I'm familiar with what the values, the mindset, the following of seasons and cycles, all that sort of stuff, but I don't want to steal your story. What was it like growing up in the Manawatu, and then the contrast between that and the life that you now find yourself leading?
My dad bought a 5 acres lifestyle block when I was 10 years old. And then he built that out to, 300-400 acres and a couple of thousand sheep and cattle and pigs and horses. And, my father's dream was always to own a farm. And so when he married my mother, he had 3 quid and a Model T. And 10 years later, he bought his first piece of land and built that out to farming. And so we moved out there when I was 10, and I'd always dreamed of having a horse, and Dad won a pony at the Bunnythorpe pub in a poker game. And that's how I got my first horse, and we learnt farming together. So I can still remember the first day we're in a sheep yard with a drenching gun, and Dad looks at me and I look at Dad, and he's got no idea what to do. So it was a amazing experience for a kid, because typically your parents know everything, and as the kid, you're the learner. But, I was 10, and my dad, between the age of 10 and 20, started sort of 15 different businesses. And I was, we were slave labor, all really involved in that. So, I got a pony. We needed to go to Pony Club. Dad noticed there weren't horse floats, so we started a horse float building business. He then bought a mare, and we ended up with, breeding mares and racing horses, and it's sort of, my father was very entrepreneurial. So anything we did, he had to do it, he turned it into a business. So we ended up with, I went in, I wanted a car when I was 15 because we were to drive. So I did a deal with my dad that I had to pay for half of it. So I got a job in a restaurant in town, but Dad had to drive me from the farm to town. And then he bought a restaurant, and then he built a restaurant, and then he built motels, and then he built a deli. So everything so we had 3 empires. We sort of had the property one, the farms. We had the restaurants, the delis, the motels, and then panel beating, horse float building, parts businesses. So,
Wow.
we had a whole, many small businesses was sort of my background.
Yeah.
And the base of it, being at the farm, like my parents would go away on holiday and leave my brother and I with the farm, the Manawatu River flooded, 300 sheep in the tree, decision making, all the things you need to do. So I think it was an incredible background for what I went on to do.
Yeah, clearly. So one of the things that I know about farming is that there's a couple of things. It can be kind of boom and bust because there's a lot of the consequences of owning that type of business that you have very little influence over, the price of oil, the price of meat, for example. And so, being able to plan and being able to manage cash effectively and those sorts of things become super paramount.
Yep. Well, we had multiple businesses
as well.
So my mother, she ran the numbers.
Okay.
And
Great.
Dad built the businesses. And so we were able to, because we had, the restaurant, we used to own the Sheraton restaurant and motels. We had the panel shop, the parts business. We had the farms. We had Dad did commercial real estate. It balanced through all of that. And he started them all from scratch with his own capital, that he developed, So, and he was very, very savvy. One of the farms he bought, there were 2 neighbouring farmers fielding. So Dad basically got a lease on the land, built a house, and then was able to leverage that into buying the land. So he was just very savvy about how he did things. It was he always looked outside the lines. So one of the things I say about, I don't really see constraints in doing things. Dad decided to do something, and then he figured out how, which sort of sounds pretty basic, but most people look at the constraint and then say, well, it can't be done. Where my father's view was actually anything can be done. You basically have to create that. So I was brought up in a very manifesting, creating, but very practical as well with the business that, all the kids worked in the business. That was sort of our upbringing.
Okay. Remarkable opportunity for a young person to observe and participate in that. And, we compare it to today, and we're both quite heavily involved in the tech sector. And so, YouTube is the greatest free training resource in the world. There's all of these MOOCs, massive open online courses that can teach you anything for $5. ChatGPT can give you answers to anything that you want in the world. You can, all these incredible tools. I'm really curious about your father when none of those resources existed, because this books back in those days would have been fairly rudimentary. And when you studied business, you were probably studying Keynesian economic theory,
yes, exactly.
Which is hopeless for building a business, right? So what is it about him, do you think, that enabled him, other than trial and error, which is one way to learn things, but that can be quite expensive and quite painful if you continue to make errors along the way. But what is it about him? I'm curious what he may have done to enable that success in an environment where he wasn't able to learn from others or observe others.
Well, you can have a view that learning is hard, or you can have a view that learning's a process and a part of everything. So my father was incredibly driven. So as an example, he took up judo when he was 16, 17 years old, and he made Japanese black belt in 2 years. So his view was things were just a decision. And it's really interesting because there's a huge amount of learning that's available. But the thing that uniquely I got in my upbringing was the mindset. And it's if you have a compliance mindset, you think you can go and learn how to do something, or typically doesn't teach you how to be creative. Because with being creative, if you think about a high performance athlete, you have to be able to dream what it is you can do, and then you have to do the huge amount of work and process to get there. And so versus reading in a book that you go and train this many hours and you do this, that doesn't enable you to be high performance. It's actually, like my son just did the Tiaroa Trail.
Oh, yes.
And he did it in 100 days walking,
well, yep.
right? And he was really
1,000 Ks, right?
That's right. So 40 Ks a day, pretty much. And this is like orienteering. There's not really a track. And it was really interesting. He really noticed that, there might be 3 cabins, and it's he's like, they got fixated that they were going to get to the final one. And he realized, though, that if he hadn't done that, he would have stopped at another one because it was so hard. And so it's sort of the difference in life of saying, actually, well, I'm going to get to the next cabin versus dreaming that you're going to get to the top. And it gives you a completely different mindset. And it gives you a view of completely different decision-making that you make along the way. So I was brought up in that mindset. And that was really the gift of my parents.
Yeah.
But then also with the work and with the process. So one of the things, a lot of people ask me, well, how do you start a business? And I'm like, I can start any business because to me it's a process. You dream it, but then you experiment and you do things and you intensely learn every moment. I don't see that as hard. I see that as I'm addicted to that process of experimentation.
I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, my husband adores Arnold, yes.
I'll explain why. So he had a book that came out a couple of years ago, the Netflix documentary series, which essentially replicated that, put bodybuilding on the map and dominated that sport for 7 years. Couldn't speak any English, wanted to be a movie star, went to the States, dominated that for 2 decades, decided that he wanted to become a politician. He probably could have been the president if he was a naturalized US citizen, but he wasn't born there. So he became the second most powerful politician in the States. And in the background, what most people don't know is Arnold is a billionaire, and that's from his investment activities. So started property developing as soon as he turned up in the States in the 1970s with no money to his name, and he just started to buy and build. Phenomenal individual. And when you profile Arnold, the thing that he said that he believes separates him from others is his ability to visualize. That's the one thing that makes a difference. And so, one of the things that I've acknowledged about most founders is that, you take, let's say 1,000 founders, 995 of them would work really, really hard. So you just take hard work off the table. It's the great leveler of entrepreneurship. So I'm going to talk and just delve a little bit deeper into the subject because it's one that I haven't really explored deeply with others on the show that have this mindset, this ability to visualize and kind of, dream and all these other things. So we talked about, growth of skills specifically, because I asked the question about your dad having to develop skills to be able to do the thing. But then we started talking about mindset. If we were to just use those two to be partial ingredients that would constitute someone's ability to succeed. So what would you put the ratio of those two as being?
Well, it's interesting because, I've just writing my first book, but have built a whole online program. So I have 2 that I'm in the process of doing. And one of them is called $1 Billion Mindset with the Growth Vortex. And the second is called Entrepreneurial Superpowers. So to be successful, you have to be able to do both. And but if you don't have the mindset, it doesn't matter if you have the capability to do it, because the mindset changes how you contextualize everything, how you see opportunity, and how you process learning. And that's the absolute key. And then you've got to learn what I call entrepreneurial superpowers, which there's certain things that you can't outsource to other people because it matches the creative cycle. And so you need both, but the first thing you need is the mindset. And this is the reason why, I just spent 4 years doing intense learning with Kiwi entrepreneurs. And what really became clear at the end of it was that was the most important thing, because I lived in Silicon Valley for 25 years, but I lived in this mini vortex of growth mindset with my father. And I found that in Silicon Valley, and that everyone's thinking in this way every day. And outside of there, you just don't get it. And so that's what is truly transformative and critical. And because if you put that with the ability with an insight as to where there is an opportunity, the ability to work hard and the ability to learn, that's sort of, to me, what the entrepreneurial essence is.
Yes.
It's not... so yes, you have to learn how to start a company, grow a company, pay payroll, all those things. But that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't create a company.
Yeah. This is a great teaser for the later in the conversation for us.
That's right, yes.
So great teaser for those that are watching to continue through the conversation. I just want to go back to Manawatu,
Sure.
working in the restaurant, bought a car, you were getting the growth thing, you were working in the family businesses, so you're having those experiences. What was the first company that you started yourself?
Well, basically, when I was 16, so my father, all my brothers were great at sport. So I come from an intensely competitive family. And so my grandmother taught me how to play poker when I was young. And so I decided games were my thing. So my family, anytime I go near a game, Monopoly, whatever, the first thing they say is, well, Linda cheats, because I always figure out the game and I win it. I'm very good at that because I couldn't play sport. And then I decided at 16 that the way that I was going to beat my father was he had built his maximum business was $2 million. So he had many small businesses.
Right.
So I decided that I was going to build a bigger business than my dad. And that became a quest for me.
Okay.
Right. And so I had lots of experience in small businesses with my father and my mother and my brothers. And I decided, well, if I'm going to build something bigger than Dad, I need to go and skill up, but then I need to go and see what big looks like so I can figure out how to do it. So basically, everyone in my family had left school before the age of 15. So I did school C, UE. Then I went to university and did computer science and accounting and finance. Computer science, it was like to learn how to scale things. Accounting and finance, so I understood the numbers because I saw the power of my father and what my mother did and run all the numbers. And then when I left, and I did that at Massey University in Palmerston North.
You would have been one of like the only
woman in the theatre sides. Yeah, I was very popular. I think I'd have you to study for if I wanted. Did Dungeons and Dragons, the whole thing, and worked in the family businesses while I went to Massey. Did a triple degree. I did accounting and finance, computer science, and my CPA in 3 years. And then decided to go to Wellington, which is where, at that point in time, all of the corporate headquarters were. So it's now in Auckland, but it was in Wellington. And ended up, I had multiple job offers. In those days, you had their on-campus recruiting, and I think I got 12 job offers. And I ended up going to Price Waterhouse because I did a deal with John Green, who became an incredible mentor of mine, that I wanted to go and learn about big companies. And so he put me on what was called the fast track program, where I got exposure to incredible companies, got promoted twice as fast, and got given a lot more exposure to complex issues, which was an incredible experience. I moved to Wellington and did that. And then as part of that, when New Zealand privatised, all the big US consulting companies came in to look at energy, to look at banking. And Price Waterhouse got a call to say there's all these Americans here. It was at Databank and the 4 banks, which were in consortium on it, and said, the Americans are making our team cry. We need somebody to sort out the Americans. Would you send someone over? And that was me.
That was you?
Yes.
Okay. Why did you get picked?
I'm very good at sorting things out.
Okay.
I have to me, when I decide to do something, it's inevitable. There's nothing that's going to stop me from doing it. I have a real mindset around that. So anyway, so I met this guy called Greg Kidd, and he'd just flown in from New York City to New Zealand, and this was in the late 80s. And I not only, sorted out the banks and got the Booz Allen project going, but I also realized the Americans had very big expense accounts, like 5 times more my income. So before long, I had the Americans investing, and I buying houses and, bought a house and flipped it and supplied parties and general Kiwis. But as part of that, got my first view ever to sort of what I would call the American entrepreneurial mindset. And one day Greg said to me, I've got all these ideas, but you seem to be really good at getting things done. So why don't we build $1 billion business? Now, this is in the 80s.
When people didn't talk about billionaires at all.
We didn't even know there was no such thing as unicorn. There was no such thing as anything. This was, So I was like, well, that certainly qualifies. That's a bigger business than my dad. So I said yes. And flash forward, that was in 1986, 87. I met him, and 10 years later, we listed on the NASDAQ.
Okay, wow.
And we built it. Yeah, so it was a pretty intense journey.
Yeah, indeed. And you started either on or around the big recession that we had back in those days.
That's right. That's right. Right around there. Exactly. Yeah, Black Monday. Yeah. Yes. So that was 87. Yeah, so, yeah, whatever. That's about right, I think. Yeah, that's when I left, yeah.
Yeah, okay, right.
Many years ago.
Yes. So you went to the States to
So,
business?
yeah, well, we actually bought it. We started in New Zealand. So we went and hired a couple of the programmers from DataBank, and we started it in New Zealand. And then we were at the James Cook Hotel in Wellington, and he was describing Manhattan. And back in those days, everyone did their OE to London. And I was like, he's like, why don't you go to New York City? And I was like, oh, never thought of that. Didn't know anyone had done that. And the other side of the napkin, he said, well, why don't you go and do an MBA at, Wharton, Harvard or Stanford or Yale? And I didn't even know what an MBA was. And I called my father up that night and says, oh, I'm going to America. I'm going to do an MBA. And, we're building this business. And then I ended up getting into the 6 top schools in the US and went to Wharton. So I was the first New Zealander to go to Wharton Business School. And that was just a complete life changer for me. But yeah. With lots of little, challenges along the way.
Yeah, no doubt. So that business, that kind of 10-year journey, we are going to talk about the subsequent business mostly for the purposes of the conversation that we're leading into. But I'm really always love inflection points in businesses. And so what was kind of 1 or 2 key things that happened for you over that 10-year journey that enabled you to take a company to a public listing? Because it's no mean feat to, especially in a different country, to go and list a company on the NASDAQ.
Yeah, well, the first thing we did was, and this was really very much part of what I would call a $1 billion mindset. So like, okay, we want to build something that's $1 billion. So let's go and find an opportunity that's big enough. So we, and Greg had this global experience with Booz Allen Hamilton. So he had a number of ideas, and then we thought, well, we'll look in New Zealand as to what New Zealand is outstanding for. And it turns out that New Zealand had the most efficient and low-cost, high-service, same-day delivery network in the world because of DataBank, because for 40 years you had to be able to get the checks to Wellington and back overnight. So we bought, with Greg's expense account, a small courier company, and observed that. And there was a guy called Kiwi Pete, and noticed that he was 5 times more productive than others. So observed why. And so I don't know if you know how just couriers work, but then you had, it was pre-GPS, etc. So you had a dispatcher, and the dispatcher knew where all the couriers were. So the customers would call to have a delivery. The dispatcher would then remember where you are and where I was.
A savant.
And they would say, you pick up this package that's going to Lower Hutt, and Linda, you pick up this package that's going to the airport. Well, he doesn't know that actually I'm right there in the building. There might be 6 packages. I just pick up one. So what Kiwi Pete did was he was a bit lazy. He couldn't be bothered remembering where everyone was, because people are pretty good at knowing where they are. So he just got onto the radio and said, hey, 2 packages going east, going west, who wants them? And I would go into the building, pick all of them up, and I'd come out the bottom and go, oh, there's 3 going to the airport, 2 going to the Hut, and you and I would meet and swap. And I'd take 6 packages to the airport, and you'd take 10 packages to Lower Hutt. As opposed to in the old system, it was all 1-1. So basically, we invented this thing based on Kiwi Pete, called free call dispatch. And that was the key concept that then helps us revolutionize courier globally, because of one dispatcher sitting in Wellington, New Zealand.
Wow. And so you took the company to a public listing. I've had Will Palmer on the show that went through that process in New Zealand. This is the first time I've spoken to someone on the show that has done it on the NASDAQ. What was that experience like?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, first of all, we built it in New Zealand for 3 or 4 years. And then Greg and I met in San Francisco, and we built one of the first SaaS companies ever in the US. And that took us about another 6 or 7 years.
Attached to the courier company.
That's right. So we went and put technology in to 35 companies in 17 cities around the US and started dominating those cities with our technology. And we were at a point where then there was the roll-up craze, and we found that our companies were getting bought. And so we're like, well, that doesn't really work. So we're like, well, we've never really intended, because at that time, the SaaS model, once again, it's not what it is today. At that time, everyone thought we were crazy, that we were taking 2 to 5% of revenue for our technology and operating practices. So we found a facilitator, and we ended up doing a bake-off. But And we had 8 offers from different investment banks to take us public. But in retrospect, an IPO is very sexy because it's very seen as that by entrepreneurs as
Ring the bell. Yep.
as ringing the bell. What I learned through the process is it's just another fundraising activity, and actually really being focused on the long term is incredibly important, because the challenge of a public company is it's very quarter by quarter focused, and that is sort of diametrically opposed to a growth company, which is it's nothing symmetrical, where a public vehicle wants to be symmetrical. But hey, it is a pretty amazing experience going through it. It's and it's another thing to learn, So in terms of how to do it well, how to facilitate that. And at the time, I didn't know that I was the first woman to do it. I didn't know, I didn't know. I was so used to being at the front of the frontier. There was nobody to ask and learn from. And I think that's a great thing today, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs who can give you the pitfalls. We would have been much better off if we'd waited 2 or 3 years to do it.
How come?
Because we were still in the midst of the restructuring. So we were taking these big companies and converting them onto our operating model. And there was a lot of fallout through that, which public companies don't like. Whereas if we'd taken private money and done that and then gone public, our base would have been much bigger. So the certainty would have been higher. And then when you're a public company, it depends on how, 3 years later, there were that's when the growth services, technology services companies came into vogue, where we were one of the first ones, and people really didn't know what to do with us. So, sometimes you're on the bleeding edge, and we were on the bleeding edge of that, because when we were in Silicon Valley, you couldn't get venture capital money, because at that point it went to all of the software was hardware. It was hardware starting to be software, but not technology-enabled services, which wasn't seen as real technology, where, it changed 5 years later, and we were way ahead of our curve.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is timing.
Yeah, the margins in the hardware game were still very, very large back in those days, and you were able to make double-digit percentage points on literally selling tin. Whereas once things became very commoditized, that those got completely eroded, went down into the low single digits of returns.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we were up in the 20-25%, but people we were just like I say, we were just bleeding edge.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. One of the things that Will reflected on is that the consequences for getting your earnings call wrong on the upside were far overweighed by the consequences of getting it wrong on the downside.
That's
so in other words,
correct.
if you misstated your earnings and it was slightly lower than that, you just got punished by the stock market. And so I'm guessing that's a journey and experience that you had to.
Well, what happened to us is the Russian debt default happened, and we were leveraged up to acquire, and we were literally 3 days away from acquiring the largest black car company in America, because we were in the dispatch business ultimately. And so what happened as a consequence of all our debt got leveraged up, and then the accountants got more conservative and decided a week before our next earnings call to change the way we were accounting for a lot of our acquisitions. And so, and when it's the first time through it, but, we'd done it for the currency of acquiring. We didn't need to do it. So, it's just the things you learn.
Yeah.
I'm much more experienced at it now than I was then. I chair multiple public companies, but the public markets it's just capital markets and how you navigate it. But when it's the first time there, we literally self-funded everything.
Right.
We raised a $2 million friends and family, and then we went public.
Yes.
So I had no experience as a CEO founder in the capital markets when I started. So you're learning at 1,000 miles an hour, right?
Of course. Yeah. And when did you personally, operationally exit that business? How long after the listing?
So a year after. So what happened 6 weeks before we listed, I was on the roadshow, and I got hit by a car in London and broke my back in 3 places and my pelvis, and pretty much everything was injured except for my left thigh and my left arm.
Wow.
And so it was I was at a place where I had to make a decision. I'd waited to make because in between that, I continued my consulting career I made partner, built quite a successful global consulting business, 200 million business with Comrie. Quit the same day as I made partner, and then we took the company public 9 months later because I was doing it at the same time. And so I put off having kids until I made partner, and then I was putting after kids until we listed. And then I was sort of faced with the concept of I'd just destroyed my body and decided to take a sabbatical.
Yes.
And regroup
And heal.
And I didn't want to, give up having a family for the business. So.
Yeah. I want to just talk about a couple of things before we do the transition there.
Sure.
One is that you've mentioned playing the game, and you talked about a quest, and you've talked about opponents and playing poker. I was speaking at a female founders event last week, and you can get the irony of me being invited to talk at this event. I was resistant to start with, but it was around fundraising and the challenge of raising capital, and I thought I need to contribute to this conversation. One of the questions I was asked was by a female founder who said that I've had so many no's from men, but whenever I am positioned in front of one now, I just have their voices going through my head telling me that I can't. And the story that I shared was that, and I was reluctant to get into that question. The rest of the panelists were talking about it. And I thought, well, actually, no. Tina, my wife, and I are learning Spanish to travel through Central America and spend a lot of time there. And so I'm waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm getting these voices in my head, half of that they're mainly Spanish and half of which I understand. So I feel like a bit of a crazy person. But there's this thing about the voices in your head. So the story that I suggested was fill your mind with the stories of highly successful women, all the way from Mary Shelley, who created sci-fi and Frankenstein, all the way through to, current days, Linda Jenkinson, and a myriad of others that are around as well. And there's so many of these stories. And so the voices in your head should change over time. Now, that's me kind of moving from the question, which was kind of game theory. I'm curious about your views on game theory in life, because the other part of that conversation was fundraising is a game. And there's rules of that game. And there's ways that you navigate your way through that game.
Yep.
And one of the things is that, and I'm curious on your view on this, is that founders don't necessarily need to believe that their business could turn over $100 million in 5 years' time, just making a number up. But they kind of need to tell that story to investors. And that's a bit of the ways that you go about playing the game. Curious on your thoughts on that
So I've got
statement.
a few different thoughts.
Yeah.
The thing is that if you want to get investors in, the business has got to have the potential to do that. So it's sort of a little bit counterintuitive to the New Zealand culture, because in the New Zealand culture, you're told be pragmatic. And so and the challenges in the New Zealand ecosystem, the average exit is 30 million. So most New Zealand investors don't really believe in that. We're getting more and more of those exits now that are larger, but they're a much smaller proportion than what you would get in the US market, in bigger markets, right? So I get this all the time in that, and especially with women, because women, there was actually a really interesting study that Harvard did, and they recorded 1,000 VC pitches, and then they correlated the questions that were asked to who raised money and who didn't. And what they found was that, first of all, in the first 30 seconds, investors decide if they're going to raise money or not. But if they listened, when they analysed the questions that were asked of women, who got a much smaller percentage of the money than men, all of the questions were risk-based and downside questions. And what they observed with investors, and it doesn't matter if it's a male investor or a female investor. In fact, in female investors, it's more marked than with male. That with men, they tend to ask only growth questions.
This is the investors of the founders.
Yes,
questions.
Investors, that's right. So basically, and if you go back to sort of conditioning, I don't know if you're a parent, I've got a son and a daughter. So daughters, especially with, there's a very close father-daughter link, and there's a close mother-son, but daughters are always conditioned to be safe, to be careful. And so there's a very overarching societal condition that women should be safe versus fundamentally that boys should be jumping off cliffs. And so it sounds very basic, but So women, if you go into a standard fundraising conversation, what you typically find is that their advisors, because they're trying to protect women, have said, oh no, don't, that can't be that big. Let's make that safer and safer. So if you go and look, and they get twice as many, 3 times, majority of their questions about what happens if it all goes wrong, don't be so aggressive. So their models are much smaller, where the men's only get, how do you get bigger? What does it look like? So there's a huge distortion in the main about how women present things to men. And so the woman's pieces are actually fundamentally not investable.
Wow.
Because there isn't the return element there.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone celebrates that there's more and more women on the investing side, but that's not actually the when I raised money, 2.5% of the money went to women. It's down to 1.6%. So that's not actually changing the game. And so when I work with, in my mentoring, and I work with women, that's why $1 billion mindset, part of the reason why I started looking at this is because I'm angry about that. It should, I'm the glass ceiling breaker, right? No one's been before me, but it should be completely different now. And this element hasn't changed. And so the first thing that I do with women is, first of all, allow them and have the space that they can actually dream like that, and then actually make them rebuild all of their models to start looking for that sized possibility. There's a reason why in the US that there's more women SMEs, successful larger women SMEs than male, because the women don't get the access to the capital, so they have to do it privately. I think the other thing is, so to me that's a very, and I've got countless research that can show this as an issue, because I'm really intrigued as to why it's not changing. And if I look at the women that I mentor, they get so much more oversight from their boards, from their investors, pressure, downward pressure all the time. So it just makes it 100 times harder for them. Now, to the point you made about, so how have I overcome that and seen it as a game? So instead of tried to fight that, I accept that. And then I think, well, what are the strengths I have as a woman? Well, one of them is men like to mentor me, right? So if you go and look at the men who have invested in me, they're the ones who, I don't want this to sound, who see me as someone who they can support and mentor. Now, because of my background, I have big dreams, because I met people along the way, like Greg in the 80s said, let's build $1 billion company. That wasn't my idea. Someone said that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to attach to that. And then I went and found people who didn't think, oh, I've got to keep LJ safe. It's like, wow, if I helped her, she can fly. She's so gutsy. And I've specifically gone and found those sorts of people to invest in me, but none of it has been traditional in the way that I've done it. I've done it completely differently, back to the way my father did things, where I went and looked at all the possibilities and I went and found it there. I went and found family home offices. I went and figured out how to get co-founders where I could put the men in front and I'm orchestrate it. How do I make it work and do that? So that's how, I haven't done anything the straightforward way, because at this moment in time, that is not available to women, in my view.
One of the people on the panel with me last week was Janine Granger from Easy Crypto.
Yep.
Do you know Janine?
Yes, I do, yes.
Yep, love Janine. She brought up that exact point about the risk, that she kept on getting questioned about the risk at the outset. So that's really interesting. I'll make sure that we put in the show notes the research that you've talked about that supports what the problem is.
Yeah.
We're going to start talking about the solution a bit later on. But what I heard you say just about the work that you do when you are mentoring women is that it sounds like to me, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll do the whole spiel and then correct the bits that I've got wrong.
Yep.
You mentioned what to me sounds like giving them permission to dream big, kind of unlocking that thing within them. And I've seen this before with some women that have small dreams when they actually can be capable of so much more.
Yep.
That are near and dear to me. So that's a key aspect. The next is to show them methods of how they can go about achieving some things, so like a process for success, and then giving them the support that they need to make sure that they can deal with the inevitable hurdles that come up along the way. And then you mentioned the power of channeling the distinctly masculine energy, which is, in some respects, we do like to kind of be in that position. And this is not being misogynistic, but helping women out is something that we kind of get a bit of a kick from, those of us in the right space.
Yeah, we see, and I sort of see masculine and feminine not as a sex thing, but as a... So I've got a lot of masculine capability, but I'm also very feminine, and I like to integrate the two.
Got it.
But I'm not trying to say I'm going to change the world. I'm saying this is how the world is. Now let me take that and figure out how it can make it work for me. I think the thing that I would say, a couple of things I would add to your commentary, which is the massive relief when you explain to women the world they live in, because all they know is it's hard. And so they think that if they try harder, they'll be able to make the world that's there, like pitching, work. And it's just saying it won't. And then secondly, it's like bringing men into coalition with the woman to support them. And that, you've got, like I say, your partners, it's that whole making them feel like they're not alone because of the amount of constraint that they get. That support is just 10 times more beneficial. And so, thinking about that, and if I think about my career, I had my father to look up to, and, he completely believed in me. And then John Green showed up. He was just from the US and South Africa. He'd said, we need more women in business. I'm going to go and find one. He completely, I felt like he had my back. And then I met Greg. And then when I went to the US, I had Pat Lamperty. Then I had, the trillion, I had these incredible coaches in Silicon Valley. In that I had, one woman who was incredible. But it was mostly men who gave me that unconditional support. They so believed in me. They loved the fact that I was so edgy and looked beyond. And that's sort of what women need. They need that sort of unconditional support to say, actually, there is a world out there that works. And it's so fascinating. You see some of them that immediately rise, and you see others that gradually build their confidence. And it's like this gradual aha experience where absolutely I can do it. Because if you think about it, if only like 1.5% of women are getting funding, there's people wonder why when you give them some funding and support, they're so successful, because it's the cream of the crop, really.
Apologies for the interruption, and thanks for listening to the show. These shows take resources to build and put together. We have a team of producers, we have some promoters behind the scenes, and of course we have the guests that generously give their time to come on the show. My only ask of you is that you go and check out my website. I advise founders on how to build value and how to navigate the exit process successfully. We have a diagnostic on the website. There's an ebook that I've written. There's a free chapter of my upcoming book, Wantrepreneur, on there. So I'd just urge you to take a couple of minutes and go and check out joshcomrie.com. There's a lot of power in positive reinforcement and giving people encouragement and enthusiasm along the way. I've observed that myself about the one of the power that can happen from that. You mentioned $1 trillion, and I think you might have going to say coach. Was that Bill? Did you work with Bill?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. I read his book, $1 Trillion Coach. Incredible book. And he sounds like, what was he like as a character?
Oh, he was amazing. So I was a CEO in Silicon Valley, and I didn't even know that he was coaching, Steve Jobs and he basically decided he had no woman CEOs he was coaching, and he just decided that he wanted some. So I was a member of a group called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. And he selected 15 of us. And we got to go to his office in Silicon Valley once a month and be mentored by him. And it was, I can still remember virtually everything he taught me. It was incredible. So once again, who would think that? And once again, I had no idea half the time. I didn't know I was the first one listening. I had no idea that I was getting coached by Steve Jobs as coach until I read the book.
Wow.
And I was like, that's my book, Hebel. And I called up the other woman. I'm like, did you know this? I had no idea.
I love this.
It was because, back then there wasn't an internet to research people. You got introduced, and it was right at the beginning of those years. So it was in the mid-90s. Right around there. But anyway.
Yes. For those that are listening, and even if they're watching, Linda, you have a real intensity and a super high energy about you. And you talked about becoming partner in a firm at the same time that you were building the courier SaaS business on the side.
Yeah.
You've talked about running at things full steam, and you've talked about the healing journey that you went through after the horrendous accident. There's a lot of energy that's there. I'd just like to delve into this briefly if I could, because one of the things that I've understood over time is that, and I'm really just scratching the surface myself of it. Well, I think that we believe energy is too much like a ledger system, in and out, as opposed to a bottomless well of energy. So let's just scratch the surface. I would say that you are an incredibly energetic person. Would that be a fair statement for me to make?
Yes, that would be fair.
Where does it come from?
I think it's because, I think it's who I am. If you talk to my mother, she said, I was born like this. But I think part of it was life was a wild quest in my childhood. And so everyone has, I went to a place called Esalen, which is a beautiful retreat in Big Sur. And I went with one of my best friends and we had to do a meditation. And then we debriefed afterwards, right? And you had to go to your, wonderful places. And her meditation was going on this lovely grassy hill with, beautiful warm breeze and giggling children around, looking out over, and that's her metaphor for life, right? Mine was, have you heard of Shangri-La? So that movie years ago. Anyway, it's like you crash on a plane, you're on a wild mountain, and then you come to this beautiful glade and you relax, and then you go on this other wild quest and adventure, and then you are in this next beautiful place. I'm the Shangri-La, and and she's there. That's who I am. I think it's because I was brought up in that I saw my father, we had nothing. My mother was from a railway family, and, my dad his dad was in a baking house, and my father decided he was going to do all of these things in the Manawatu, which was very unique, right? And so our life was like, buy a pony, dad's mate had a racehorse. So, next minute we're racing, and there's a revolution of Fiji. Dad's on the plane to see what opportunities are there. He's, we're pulling things, it was just sort of, and everything was, Dad would convince all his mates to come and do the haymaking. So we had all the free labor on the farm. And then, I'm really good at baking egg pies and cooking because you had to cook for the shearers and all the workers. And that's what Dad's like, we would call you up and go, hey, we're going hunting. You bring the beer. He'd pick you up in a helicopter, drop you off at the top of the Tararuas, and we're pig hunting and deer hunting in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was just sort of like life was fabulous. It's like living in a quest, and there's always something at the end of the quest.
Yes, an adventure and a game.
That's right, and intensity. So I was brought up because my dad was a very good sports person, so were both my brothers. That takes a huge amount of intensity and practice, and I enjoy intensity and practice. And so I absolutely love life. I love creating. I am an adventurer and an explorer. So I see, I've been to more than 100 countries. I've lived in 23 cities. I've experienced life in all these different ways, and that's what gives me my energy.
Mm-hmm. I have a theory that the reason that we've been put here, just getting a little bit woo-woo for a second, why do we exist as a species, is we've been given a series of gifts as individuals. It could be intelligence, it could be reason, it could be arts, you could be musically very talented, whatever that thing might be. And the job that we have as an individual is to discover those things and then maximize those things, maximize the delivery of those things, and ideally along the way in service of others as well, in some way, shape or form. And it's okay to get rich from doing service. Wealth creation is a great thing, especially once you have some wealth and you share it with others, which I know that you do. You have a charity and all these other things, which we'll get to. So what's your view on that statement that I just made there? Like the reason that we're here is to maximize, and because clearly you're maximizing the things that you are great at, and along the way probably supplementing the things that you're not good at through hiring and through getting advice and insight from others. But what's your view on that?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I like to live at the edge, which so it's not for me. yeah, so to me, I think we've all got gifts, you know, and I've got this gift of creating in chaos. So I'm not very good in non-chaos. I'm very disruptive. So no, and I think, you know, if you look at, there's a lot of different views to how to make a difference. I know when I was like 23 years old and in Wellington, New Zealand, and I can remember John Green said, you know, what is it you want to do? And I'm like, I want to make a difference. I want to make a big difference. But the thing that I've learned along the way is I'm really good at building things. And actually the best way I can make a difference is through building things, not trying to, you know, and I've, in my many different phases, you know, I've done a lot of different things, but that's sort of where I've got to in my life, and that I'm simplifying to that actually is to where can I create things that will really make a difference in the world. And absolutely, I think I've got this, it's like Steve Jobs always says, you can connect the dots in the rearview mirror. I'm a particular set of dots that's incredibly unique because I've built, you know, my biggest company, 250 million US in revenue from the Oriental Parade in Wellington, New Zealand. You know, it wasn't even from Silicon Valley. I've, you know, my biggest accolade in my consulting career was we improved the value of Bank of America by 300 million, which at that point was a lot of money. You know, I worked on the CEO floor for 2 years in, you know, one of the biggest banks in the world. I've, you know, worked at some of the biggest nonprofits. So I've worked, you know, from the basement, and I've worked, you know, I worked at Merrill Lynch, you know, in the World Trade Center. So I've had these very unique perspectives and I've worked all over the world where, you know, you want to talk about banking in Africa versus banking in Asia. Versus business in all different places. I've opened offices all around the world. I've got a very unique perspective that I can bring to things. So I get my energy from that because, you know, it continues to build, but it's also the people and making a difference along the way, you know?
Yes. Are you a yes woman?
Yes, in terms of absolutely. Yes, I would say that.
Yes. Okay.
I take on too much.
Right. Yeah. I did wonder if that was the case. You're clearly an opportunity creator. I've thought about the world of CEOs, and there's the start build CEO, which is quite different from the consolidate CEO who look for incremental improvements across a company, quite different from the change CEO brought in to fix a mess that someone else has left behind, and quite different from an exit CEO, someone who's able to identify the opportunities, the value levers inside a business, and then take it through a sales process. Sometimes some of those things exist in one person, but more often than not, they're quite different skill sets. And so what I'm hearing is that you're the start and the build person, incredible at seeing an opportunity, forming a team to get that thing going, building a series of values inside the company, winning some customers, raising some money, getting it to, I mean, you know, $250 million is not a small company by any stretch of the imagination. But at that stage, you obviously needed to get away from that business because it probably needed a different set of skills. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's partly where, you know, I sort of say I had 5 lives. You know, I had the farm life. Then I had the going and learning about big, so my consulting life and my partner there. Then I had my first big exit, which was DMS, which we were built. And then I had my portfolio where I started multiple companies and nonprofits. But the last 10 years, I've really focused on governance, and not really governance for governance sake, but to really understand that element as it relates to growth in terms of, instead of being the CEO, how do you be the chair and facilitate that?
Yeah.
And so because I love growing things and doing it in that way. And so really since I was, for the last 20 years, I've got better and better at either growing CEOs or hiring them and figuring that, and they are better at it than I'm at. But I'm very good at the initial growth. I'm very good at figuring out how to build big, and I'm very good at turning around, but I'm no good at steady state.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
I'm actually destructive at steady state. So that's why moving into the chair role where you can have a CEO driving it is the right thing. You know, and so I've learned that as a skill.
Yes.
You know, in terms of that.
And some self-awareness as well along the way.
Well, a huge amount of self-evolution, etc., to be able to do that. And even in the chair role, I'm quite disruptive.
Right.
So making sure I'm in the right place at the right time. So a lot of chairs will go in for 7 or 9 or 10 years. And now I realize I'm more a 3 to 5 year chair, because then you need a different type of chair as well. And that's great because I go into the sort of the tough bit and do that.
Yeah, I think self-awareness is possibly the most underrated capability of people to have as a CEO, the awareness of the impact that they have on others and what they're able to do themselves and not able to do. And I think that a lot of men especially really don't have too much self-awareness.
Yeah, well, I think it's because I see everything as a learning journey. I've probably got a bit too much because sometimes you do have to have a harder skin, so to speak. But because I'm always evolving to the next thing, I'm part of my mission is always to, okay, I'm going to take a chair role now. How do I become a good chair in terms of a transitional chair to get a company from, A to B?
Yeah. So horrendous accident put you in the position of going, I need to exit DNS, which you did. You had some intention time out, started a family, and then you looked into your next venture. So let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, it was it was an amazing experience listing, it was just incredible. And but I didn't know if I wanted to do it again because I think this was part of the, very Kiwiness of me. It's sort of like the way people treat you when they think you're very wealthy, the way the influences people try to exert when you're in control of a big asset, which we were at the time. And I didn't really know if I wanted to do that because I didn't really like that side of human nature. So I went into a very deeply reflective time. I took a year's sabbatical. And at the end of that year, I decided, you know what, I was going to do it differently and I was going to do it my way. And there was a real mantra, sort of the ethos was, you have to focus, you've got to build your company. And when you're successful, you can have what you want. And when you break your back and you watch, you don't know if you're going to be able to walk or you don't know what that looks like, I sort of realized, well, you don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow. So I asked myself in that year, what was it I wanted? What did I want my life to look? And I read a Buddhist book, and there was a saying in it which says, if you take a glass of water that's full, put an egg in it, it'll overflow. But if you take an empty glass and put an egg in and fill it with water, it won't. And that basically meant is decide what you want and build your life around that. So I decided that I wanted to have a family and that I didn't want to, my first venture, I worked 6 days and slept on the 7th and didn't see family, didn't see friends, sacrificed my health for that. And so I decided I was never going to miss another family birthday. I was never going to miss another big event, that I was going to work, I wasn't going to work on the weekends, which doesn't sound like that. And then we started a business for my husband. And then I also wanted to give back. So I joined the Red Cross fundraising and then started this global group for women, did all of it at the same time. And
how did the not working 6 days a week work out for you?
Very disciplined. Constraint theory. It's all constraint theory. So what I discovered was I earned the same amount of money, as CEO of the next company, but I had, 2 kids, a cat and a dog, the housekeeper, the nanny, the au pair. We started multiple companies and I did all of it. And it was just a decision. I'm very, in terms of how to make that work,
Back to that mindset piece.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's constraint theory. So what I learned was it was all possible. You just make different decisions and optimize in a different way, which is what I did. So the next company I built to just under 100 million and sold that for 150 million. The wine company we built to a really nice little $10 million company. With the Red Cross, I built their fundraising capability to the point that I got a special citation. I started one of the first for-profit, non-for-profits in West Africa and ended up, mentoring the president of Liberia. I got invited to Clinton Global Initiative. I did the whole social venture circuit as how you build social venture. And I had a beautiful son and a daughter and a vibrant family life. And I never missed another party in New Zealand, My grandmother's 95th, I flew from New York on a Friday and arrived on, I left on Thursday, arrived Saturday morning, had the party Saturday night, flew back on Sunday, but I was there, never missed it.
Yeah.
And had a really successful portfolio life and did it my way,
So you went through all of those exits, and then you decided to focus on establishing how you could contribute to the New Zealand startup ecosystem. And that's been a real kind of concentrated direction of your energy over the last few years. So tell us about what you're up to there.
Yeah, well, when I sold my last company, it was unexpected. We were thinking it was going to take us another couple of years. And I happened to be I came down, we sold my biggest contract ever, $250 million contract to Visa. And our senior client was in Singapore. And the deal was if we won the contract, I had to be based in Asia. So I was between Shanghai, Singapore, and Sydney. And we sold the company. And my husband married me to get a New Zealand passport. He's in English. And so that was 20-something years later, 25 years later. I said, well, darling, this is the closest we're probably ever going to be to New Zealand. So I always take a sabbatical when I sell a company. Right. So I decided to take a sabbatical, and I was on the board of Air New Zealand. So we came to New Zealand to help him. He got his permanent residency. Right. And I took a couple of years off, but I have a lot of energy. So I did governance because I was looking at that as my new skill building thing for my next thing, because I'm always skill building. And power and influence is what I call one of the entrepreneurial superpowers, because you can build a company, but if you don't understand how to keep control of it, how to balance all of that, what's the point, right? So I spent a whole pile of time in governance, and then I decided I was so frustrated because, I was on the first Silicon Valley, NZT Silicon Valley, beachhead in Silicon Valley, and then I watched all these Australians come to America and do successfully, so successful. And I watched the Kiwis come, and most of them went back and didn't succeed in America. And that really annoyed me because I'm very competitive, and I hated if the Aussies won. So one of my mentors in America said the answer is always in the complaint. So I got sick of complaining about Kiwi entrepreneurs. So I thought, so I was in quarantine, and I put a note out on Facebook and LinkedIn and decided to do an experiment. So I basically said, I've raised $350 million US, and I've, had a few successful exits, and I'm looking for 25 entrepreneurs to mentor. That's actually where I met Scotty, and got 50 Kiwis sign up, and I interviewed them, and I selected 25, and so I mentored over the next 3 years, 25 a year. And I bought a building in downtown Wellington, and once a month I'd have them in for a day. And I spent the next 3 years working on what I call my guinea pigs to figure out why they weren't growing like I thought they could be.
Mm. And I've got to ask the question, obviously, what are the reasons?
Well, it's just so interesting. So, and like in 2000, my last company I exited in 98, 99 I left. My husband and I came back to Auckland, and we were going to buy a place here. We in fact found a great place, but that was pre-knowledge wave. There was no entrepreneurial world in New Zealand, and so that's when I moved back to Silicon Valley to do my next set of companies. We came back in 2000, and there really wasn't any ecosystem here, so we moved back to Silicon Valley, and that's where we started our next set of companies. So if you think about it, the ecosystem in New Zealand, Helen Clark called Knowledge Wave, which facilitated, the Viv Fund, which started venture capital, which funded a lot of the incubators, which funded the angels and got it going. So that's not very long, right? That's 25 years. And as part of that, Viv used Goldman Sachs to help set up a lot of the basic structures. But they used what I would call more private equity principles rather than what you would call startup principles in that. And so it embedded into the New Zealand ecosystem this whole be pragmatic. So in that, companies had to be profitable and cash flow positive when they were very small. Whereas when you're building a growth company, I talk about it like if you can't build a garden shed, right? You have to you're building a skyscraper, but you've got to build enough foundation to get you to the next level, but you can't afford to put all of it in at the beginning. So New Zealand companies were optimizing for a small size. So a number of different issues. One of them was NZTE did this whole analysis on it, but our cultural concept of be pragmatic was completely away from imagine something really big and then figure out how to build it. So everyone was downsized from that perspective. Kiwis are incredibly individualistic, so number 8 wire. So we do not ask for help. So the difference I saw in Kiwis coming to America versus Aussies is the Kiwis wouldn't ask for any help, where the Aussies would get help. So Kiwis were not engineered to ask for help and get support. And and then we're very let's do it in New Zealand, and then let's do it in Australia, and then let's do it in the UK. That can be nothing to do with where the opportunity is. And in fact, that could be a lot harder than what it really is. So I came up with a whole set of formulas. So the first thing was $1 billion mindset is imagining, actually. And then the second is a whole set of analytics around that. It's like we did with DMS. We went and looked at courier, and then we saw that the biggest market in the world was the US, and the second biggest was the UK. So we piloted and built out the pilot in New Zealand, and then we moved to America, and then we went to the UK, and then we went to Australia. At that time, there was no other on-demand courier in the world. It was all routed, right? When I did Le Concierge, when concierge was a concept in America, loyalty, rewards, a very American concept. And when the American companies wanted to take it global, we then built that out globally. So we followed the customer and the market. So Kiwi companies typically didn't look at it like that because there's a whole view of, well, America's really hard to do business in. It's actually not. It's being market focused and customer led. And Kiwis are typically, they're into what I call the egg and not the chicken. They're really good at building things, but they're not good at thinking about how to repeat it and grow it big. And you have to think about that from day one. So, not looking at where the markets were and being customer led, often spending way too much time perfecting the product rather than realizing that part of the product is the monetization of the product. So you'll hear in New Zealand, we're not good at commercialization. They actually think that it's a separate thing, but it's not. It's like you can't have an egg without a chicken.
Mm.
So when I build a company, I start building commercialization the same moment that I start building the product.
Yes.
And then you're able to build it. So they were very fundamental. And then the New Zealand angels very much focused on people being pragmatic, and then they miss the opportunities in the market because of that. So once again, I think it's fabulous that this market is evolving and growing, but it didn't necessarily support the growth. Where if you go and look at 700 SaaS companies, only about 30 of them have got bigger than 10 million in revenue. So they've got that headwind, and how do you change that headwind?
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about product market fit in tech, and when I meet founders that are looking to raise money, they often believe they're at the point of achieving that, when really what they have done is enabled themselves to build a decent product, but they haven't commercialized that thing effectively. So that as a customer, they haven't aligned with the problem the customer has clearly. They haven't solved the marketing problem whatsoever,
100%.
Because that's a critical aspect of it. Being able to repeat and acquire those customers on a very reasonable CAC, customer acquisition cost. Yeah. And so you were going to add to that product market fit piece.
Yeah, so to me it's 4. It's product market channel model. So even figuring out the pricing model, it's all part of it, right? If someone hasn't paid for it and paid for it in a way that's sustainable, you don't really have that. And that's something where many New Zealand founders raise money before they have that. And that's a real challenge, right? Because that puts a huge amount more pressure on, where before that you've got to be in this mass experimentation mode. So, really. And so I always do all of those from day one. I'm testing the model. I'm testing the channels. I'm testing, and very customer-led.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the problems that I see with founders experimenting with new markets is they're unclear on what their hypothesis is in terms of what they're actually trying to solve for. So clarity on the problem and then clarity on the measure that would dictate and indicate to them that they are actually indeed on the right path to solving for that problem, but also checking in to go, is this the right problem that we're solving for along the way? So startup essentially is just a big hypothesis. The world wants a solution to this problem that I am either passionate about or that I've kind of stumbled across a solution to this thing, and they're prepared to pay some money for it and to continue to pay some money for that thing. So then along the way you have a whole bunch of series of hypotheses that you have to test out and market through whatever it relates to as a part of the business. And I see people that are not clear on what they're solving for at that particular point on the journey, nor how they're going to measure the impact of their intervention.
Yeah, well, they could think that they can intellectualize it too early. So one of the things that you find in a lot of emerging innovation sectors like you have in New Zealand is that most of the people who are giving advice are people with corporate experience. And so the challenge is people with corporate experience, they're really used to being in it's like I always say, it's like a muffin and a donut. You can't turn a muffin into it's a completely different thing. And that is actually challenging because a lot of the times people are saying, oh, well, go and work on your business plan, where actually, that's why I call it a growth vortex. You have to be saying, I have to be doing it now, and you can't ask people, you have to observe it. And then you've got to go back and say, well, is this a big enough market? And can I actually monetize this and let me test it in the moment and start getting that vortex going in terms of making that work? And it's intense because you have to be prepared to completely change what you're doing constantly until you find it.
Yes. Yep.
And it's not static.
No.
And it's very much market-led, which is that's why once you get hooked to being an entrepreneur, that's what becomes exciting. But it ultimately is challenging because you have to be able to completely deconstruct everything constantly.
Mm-hmm. I love your use of metaphors. So the similar ingredients for a donut as a muffin, but you can't make one into the other. I think that's a great expression. Yeah. So you've been you did the pilots with the program, and in the background you've started to write a couple of books, the $1 billion mindset, and entrepreneurial superpowers. I'll come back to those in a second. Yep. Where's the program evolved to now?
So for me, if you think about my life, since I was 10 years old, I've been living in this growth world. And then going to Silicon Valley, and the sort of people that I work with there are pretty. It's like a bubble, right? It's a bubble of growth and creativity. Most people don't get to live in that world all the time, and so one of the challenges is what I've learned, especially in markets outside of Silicon Valley, is you're not exposed to the thinking. I mean, how many people in New Zealand have had Bill Campbell coaching them? Exactly, right. I didn't even know. So you don't have that. It's not like, so we're all special, right? But I've had this incredible set of people who've helped and support me. So what I've done is through the experiment, my first view was, well, I'll take people who've got sort of $1 million companies and I'll show them how to grow to 100 million. I'll enable that. But what I found was the challenge was that by the time they'd got to 200,000, $1 million, there were already so many things structurally not working that would not enable them to become big. So I developed what I call this sort of core program, which is the core principles of these formulas so that you can go and try them and experiment with them. So as an example, how you network to get anything you want, I call the jelly bean formula, right? And I can make things happen. I raise millions of dollars using the jelly bean formula. So I have a module called the jelly bean formula, and here's the story of how I learned the jelly bean formula and who I learned it from. Here's the step-by-step guide. Now here's the exercises. Now here's a group of entrepreneurs, and go and do it. And when you're in this state, this is when you've got it. So you can talk to entrepreneurs and level up that now go to America and they use the jelly bean formula, and it's overwhelming. They suddenly have people who want to be customers. They want to have people who want to invest in them. So I have 12 formulas and they're deeply practical and applied, just like the way I build businesses. You can intellectualize it, you can build a model, but then you do it. And that's what it's like. And so my goal with that is to actually take that globally to enable anyone who has a concept that they want to build something big. And for them, it could be 5 million. It doesn't have to be 100 million, but it means that they wouldn't be constrained if they decided along the way that there was that opportunity there.
Yes.
And to really share that, because, as a farm girl from the Manawatu, where I was completely blessed was these amazing people along the way. My father, my mother, John Green, Greg Kidd, Pat Lumpity, Alison Davis, Bill Campbell, who believed in me and I learned from to do that. But everyone doesn't have that opportunity.
Yes.
I was really interesting. I was speaking to a set of, African American woman. And they're like, well, we don't even know one person who could help us like that. I have a lot of Maori women and they say the same thing. And I'm like, well, you know me, right? So just enabling them in that way. So my goal in this next year is to launch my Level Up Core program globally, because to me, this is what I want to do to empower other people to take journeys, the quests that I take.
Yes.
It's like my way of, and it's all of the incubator, all that's great, but this is on top of it. This is like the vortex, the magic
Yes.
of how you actually be not the 99%, but the 1%.
Yeah. My mind, when you talked about the jelly bean, for some reason went to you're familiar with riders, which is the term given to the talent, typically rock stars. They have a rider, and it might be, I need a limousine with 2 bottles of champagne and 3 white T-shirts and a blow-up shark and other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Van Halen, back in the 80s, very famously had a request for a jar of, I think it was yellow M&Ms.
Yeah.
No, it was a jar of M&Ms with the yellow ones removed.
Yeah.
And they had the piss taken out of them as a consequence for this. But actually what they were interested in was the level of detail, because if they got the jar and it had M&Ms in there, but the yellow ones were in there, then they realised that there's probably going to be a problem with the sound equipment.
Yeah.
There's going to be some issues with security.
Yeah.
They weren't kind of detail-oriented, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap this around to another question, because one of your book titles is Entrepreneurial Superpowers.
Yeah.
And through the course of this conversation, and used the word jelly bean, used a number of different metaphors. And a metaphor is an incredibly powerful teaching tool, because it enables someone to take something from the world that they live in and then bring it into a world of unfamiliarity and then some understanding. So I'm curious about 2 things. I'm guessing that one of your superpowers is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so could you tell me about some of what your other superpowers are that have gotten you here? Energy and mindset is 2 of the things I would suspect. But I'm curious if you could give us some insight into what's in the book around that as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's did you ever watch Star Trek?
Yeah, of course.
Right, so the Borg.
Yes.
Right, so it is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
The Borg will absorb. So Greg Kidd, I played Dungeons and Dragons and always into the mythical. I always loved the mythical, and so Greg was really into Star Trek, and it was always about it is inevitable. And I think part of the mindset I got from my father was everything's possible. It's just a matter of figuring out how. So, and so superpowers, it's about you have to have that fundamental belief, and so there's 2 elements. There's jelly beans, which is how do you manifest that? How do you believe? How do you get people to help you on that? And I'll give you a story. My niece wanted to get a job in New Zealand. She just graduated, and they don't have the same career support they had when I graduated. So I said, shall I tell you about this formula where you can get anything you want? It's called the jelly bean formula. You can use it to get a job. So I told her about the formula. It's very, very straightforward. Would you like to hear the formula?
Yes, please.
Right. It's like, first of all, you have to know what you want. Know a question. Any question's got to be really, really clear. And then you ask somebody who you know to introduce you to 2 people that you'd like to discuss this question with. Just explore and discuss. And then at the end of that, you thank them and you ask them for 2 people who they think would be helpful for you to talk to. And then when you get them to introduce you. And when you've had that meeting, you go back to the person who introduced you and you say, thank you. Now, does that sound very hard?
No.
No. So 99.9% of Kiwis cannot do the jelly bean formula.
What do you put that down to?
Oh, well, I'll tell you the story, shall I?
Yes,
tell you
please.
what happens.
Yeah.
So I said to my niece, okay, use it for a job. So I didn't just give her 2. I gave her 5 people to talk to.
Yes.
And 3 months later, I hadn't heard anything from her.
Okay.
So what does that tell you, right? And I rang her up and said, how'd it go, darling? Did you get a job? She said, no. I said, oh, really? I said, well, what happened? I said, did you talk to the people? She said, well, yeah, I looked at the 5 and 2 of them I didn't think were relevant. So I didn't call them. I said, oh, really? Okay. So what about the other 3? She said, oh, yeah, I met with this one and she didn't like me at all. She was really difficult. She asked me to do all these things. And I said, oh, and did you do them? She said, oh, no, I was too scared. I didn't follow up. I said, oh, okay. Well, I said, what about the other 2? She said, oh, yeah, I had great meetings with them. I said, oh, did you ask? Oh, no, they were too important. I couldn't ask them for help. And I said, oh, well, how did it work out? You didn't get a job, right? So like 6 months later, she comes back to me and says, she still doesn't have a job and, she'd broken up with her boyfriend. And I said, all right, then I'm only going to help you, but I'm only going to help you. I'm going to supervise you and you have to promise that you do everything I tell you. So I gave her the same set of instructions and she came back and she decided she wanted to get into Stanford University and she wanted to get a job in Silicon Valley, which is not exactly easy when you're a Kiwi.
No, neither of those things.
No. And so anyway, we did the same thing and she got into Stanford. She got a full scholarship paid and she got the internship. Now, what was the difference? When I explored what happened first, the first thing she did with the 5 is she judged who could help her and who couldn't, right? So I get judged all the time. So part of the jelly bean formula is if you believe that someone's out there and you believe in not even the 6 degrees of separation, New Zealand, there's no separation. There's somebody who can help you. And by using the jelly bean formula and having no judgment, you talk to everyone you're introduced to, you will find the person that can help you. Second is most Kiwis don't know what they want. So they'll have a meeting and they'll have a general chit-chat and they'll never actually make a request. So in America, you'll notice that I'll meet you and you will immediately tell me what you're looking for and I will immediately start helping you. What Kiwis do is they don't notice when people start trying to help. So what I'm being trained as an American, right? So as soon as I meet you and you tell me what you're doing, I'm like, oh, I can introduce you to this. Well, have you seen this study or can I do this? Kiwis don't pick up on that at all. I've had so many Kiwis meet with me and I don't even know what they're trying to meet me about. And then saying thank you means you can follow up. So that was the yellow, like the M&M thing. It's like, they say what they mean and they do something. So someone who comes back and says, well, I'll thank you for setting that up. Thank you. I solved the problems is what I did. So my first time I used the jelly bean theory, I met a guy and he told me about this. And I thought, oh, great. He used to work for me and he'd become wildly successful. I'm like, Tom, what happened to you? And he goes, oh, well, I learned this. And I said, all right. It was when I took my first sabbatical and I was very cynical on the world and wanted to explore what I wanted to do next. So he said, okay. I said, all right then, because I love spreadsheets. So I set up a spreadsheet, Tom Miller. He introduced me to 2 people. One was a woman whose father had just had a $850 million exit, started up a VC firm, and I went and he'd met her at the jungle gyms with his kids. Met with Lisa and said, oh, I don't know if I want to do this again. It's just, it's hard. It's, blah, blah, blah. And we got on really well. And she said, well, look, let me know what you decide to do. And if you decide to start another company, run it past me because I'll give you some input. So I did my 35 meetings and, thanked Tom and thanked Lisa. And at the end, I sent out a broadcast email to the 35 people I'd met and said, thank you so much. Then I went back to Lisa and said, oh, would you read my 5-pager? I've decided to start another company and this is what it's about. And she faxed back a $5 million term sheet. And so voila. And a condition was I needed to raise a $500,000 friends and family round. So I emailed the 35 and 5 of them all came up with $100,000 each and off I went.
Okay.
Jelly bean formula.
Yep.
So I perfected it, so it's all there to help, right?
Yes.
Personal relationships. Yes. People see that you follow through. most people, so I'm great at building quests. Many people aren't great at building quests, but they want to be on the quest.
Right.
So this is a way of them being on the quest. You build your advisors from that, what it looks like. So there's an example of the jelly bean formula, Yeah.
There's a couple of things that sit in behind the scenes here. We're obviously both very familiar with the power of setting goals.
Yeah.
And the older that I've gotten, I've kind of more attached myself to intentions these days.
Yeah.
Intention to go to a place because it has a greater lightness around it, as opposed to goals which can feel sometimes quite heavy.
Yeah.
And they can kind of, drag you in a difficult kind of direction at times that there's some sacrifices and consequences that sit around the outside of it. So you're clearly very intentional about things. And you mentioned some Buddhist philosophies earlier on. And so, one of the things about Buddhism is the life is dukkha, which we make mean life is suffering, but it's actually the difference between what you have and what you want. And on the way in the door, you were talking about another phase for you beyond the program, the Level Up program, of how you meditated on something and came up with the notion of $1 billion company. So I'm not sure how much of that you want to share in a public forum, but there's a bit of a paradox that sits in there. There's the satisfaction and the contentment with what we have and the desire and the intention to kind of go to the next level. Now, clearly you've talked about being a builder, but is that something that you reflect upon very often, kind of achieving, both living in a life with both of those things, contentment and satisfaction, avoiding the life is dukkha, number one, the first tenet of Buddhism? And then the desire to drive, to push, to grow, and to be intentional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting because since I had that accident, I've really tried to maximize the moment and be, happiness is a discipline. It's not something that you get by achievement. It's something that you'll be. So, and I always am struck with, because I'm so driven, to make sure that I, preserve that. But to me, happiness is a quest, right? So, and it's being with people and doing wonderful things every day, and that's how I live my life. So one of the things is you ask where I get my energy from. I live this incredibly rich life, which I've created for myself, if that makes sense, right? But part of it for me is, so when you ask the question, well, it's really interesting. As a New Zealander, I still find myself with some inherent limitations or beliefs. And I was meditating down in actually Abel Tasman National Park in January of last year, thinking about I've got colleagues who are 100 or 1,000 times more successful than I am. And I was like, I wonder why that is. And as I meditated on that, I realized that I actually had a view that you shouldn't be too successful. It shouldn't be too big because that was just too excessive. And so then I thought, well, imagine actually I don't really see, money as money. It's more like energy. So I was actually limiting my energy. So I thought, well, what happens if I just remove that? Because actually it's not good or bad. It's just energy and it's how you use it, which is the point you made earlier about making impact. So what would I do with that impact? And I have a whole vision of that in terms of all of this work I've done in helping with entrepreneurs and having no condition money for women or doing things that can really be helpful in the world. I'm like, well, okay, then what happens if I take away that and allow myself to go to the next level? And would I like to do that? Yeah, so I basically challenged myself to think, why don't I do $1 billion thing now? And so I went back, I went out into the world in January and I had everything had that in front of it. So I had a couple of different opportunities to do something that was world breaking. And it was just, so I have just taken a new role. I'm the CEO of a US holding company and we're about to, everyone would have heard of stable coins. We're going to do the first deposit coin in the world. And it has ability to just transform how money flow works globally. And so I'm really excited about it. And I am challenging myself to be unconstrained in how I approach it. So, Yeah, that's a new box breaker for me.
Yes, I can't wait to follow that journey.
Yeah.
Going back to those 2 book titles, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else there behind either the billionaire's mindset or
billion dollar mindset.
Sorry, billion dollar mindset, or entrepreneurial superpowers. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on about those?
Well, it's just interesting because I think billion dollar mindset is just so much about that breaking out of just challenging yourself to 10x whatever mindset you have and the power of that. So it's sort of a lot of the times you go, well, that's just woo-woo, imagine something and it will come. Well, if you're a athlete, there's a lot of work to do behind that. But the reason why you have to 10x your imagination is that then you're forced to look at things in terms of how to do it differently because it's the only way to solve it. So it's actually incredibly practical. If you go and look at founder superpowers, these are what I call the skills. So if you become a builder, there's a list of skills you have to build. And for me, the list of skills you have to build as a founder is the most important is your founder inner life. You know, how do you maintain that vision? How do you maintain the discipline? How do you have a family life? Then there's the power of influence, jelly beans. How do you manifest? How do you make it happen? How do you storytell? Storytell is connecting with people to understand something they've never imagined before. And then I call it power and influence. How do you manage boards, investors? The numbers? How do you deeply understand the numbers and economics? Most people they've been told when they were 10 they were good at art or not good at math. You've got to understand the numbers. Fundraising, how you manifest that, as well as sales. Everyone goes, well, I can't sell. Well, you've got to, that's just as an entrepreneur, if everything else is going down, you've got to go and find those 3 customers and you've got to learn how to do that. So to me, they're all the things you have to learn how to do very well, even if you have other people that you bring in as well. Yes. Everything else you can outsource, so to speak.
Yes. When should we expect the books to drop, Linda?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, but I'm hoping this year.
Okay.
But ironically, I'm doing it differently. Normally people write the book and they write the course and the content. I've written the course, so the course is going to launch in May, so that is available to anyone.
Okay.
And then from that, the book will come out. So, yeah.
And for people that are watching and listening to this, how do they find that? How do they track you so that when that comes out in May, they can access it?
So my website, lindajenkinson.com, just go and sign up there.
Yes.
That's right. And there will be, and that's the best place to start, and all of that's getting, there'll be a place to sign up for the book. But in the meantime, if you just sign up for emails, you'll hear about that.
Start getting some magic from Linda. Great.
That's right, yes.
2 books popped into my mind as we've been talking, and they'll be kind of supportive to this conversation. You've talked about constraints quite a lot. There was a great book that I read which was called The Beautiful Constraint, and it was about understanding what they are and then how to remove them and then think about problems through a whole different light. So that could be useful to watchers and listeners. The other one is 10X is Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan, which is again about kind of blowing things up. And so rather than, and I think this is a classic Kiwi trait, as we get to $1 million and the question we go is, how do we get to 2? Rather than what you're saying, how do we get to 100?
That's right. And that's why I say with Level Up, if you look at it just from a math perspective, 97% of people don't get to $1 million in revenue, right?
Yep.
And so it's 0 to 1, 1 to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100. And you always have to be, the reason why we've got so many SaaS companies, for example, is sort of 7 to 12, 14 million, because when they got to 1, they didn't figure out how to get to 50. You have to go 2 levels ahead. And to do that, you have to break up a lot of things. And that's hard again. It's as hard as beginning again because you have to change and evolve. So it's a lot easier to become linear because the brain doesn't think exponentially. So, synchronicity is really, really interesting to read. It explains how the brain processes that. So you're always needing to go plan 2 levels out. When I do that in New Zealand, most of the time people go, don't be so ridiculous. If I'm a $50 million company, how can I even imagine being a $250 million company? But if you don't do that, you won't.
Yeah.
So that's the power of that,
Yeah, I hear you. I've got two last questions for you. One is I view the word, or contextualize, I view the word hustle as being a positive thing because, you're prepared to go out there and do the work. And you were talking about having the imagination of what could be possible, the visualization. There was that book, The Miracle, that came out in the early noughties, which was written by a Kiwi. And it said, all you need to do is to visualize and you will get everything you want. And they forgot about the fact that you need to do the hard work, right? Which is the hustle aspect. We've, like everything in the world, we kind of pendulum between things, and there's this anti-hustle culture at the moment kind of thing. Do you have a view on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, the challenge is, you see, hustle is sort of like it conjures up second-hand
car salesman.
Yeah, or it hustles up taking people's money.
Right.
That's what it conjures up. Hustling to me is create, it's one thing to say I'm going to build $1 million company or a $10 million company. It's another thing to go and sell some clients and get some real revenue in the door. And so if you look at hustling from that view, it's basically, I'm creating value, but it's something that hasn't been done before, right? So it's not, especially, in the day of the internet, like when I went out there and I decided to do a book, I went and did all this research on books because I want to write an iconic book. I want to write a book like, books that last for decades. And you see all these people who wrote a book and that's what they became famous for, rather than actually figuring out how to master something. So, Dale Carnegie, he just writes iconic books. And I think that's part of the reason why, is that people look at, media and being able to present things is absolutely, a discipline but that doesn't mean you know how to build a company from scratch and you know how to make that work. And I think part of that sort of influencer generation has affected that impact. There's certainly many people that like to think, and that's why I say part of my $1 billion mindset is, you've got to have the $1 billion vision. It needs to be values or DNA based, values and mission based, the quest, value based quest. You've got to understand the model, the $100 million model, but then it's do it now, do it in this moment, in this second. And that's what, to me, the hustle is about. It's about action. So maybe I would say take action rather than hustle, because you can talk all you like, but you've got to be able to create things in reality. So that's the distinction I would make.
That's wonderful reframing. The world that both of us move in, albeit in different parts of the planet at different times, is the entrepreneurial space. Not sure if you know this, but the number 1 and the number 2 career choices for high school leavers now in the United States, and the same, I believe, is pretty true of New Zealand. Entrepreneur is number 1, influencer is number 2. So we talked about both of those things a second ago.
Right.
Speaking of the art of book writing, this is something I learned relatively recently. You mentioned Dale Carnegie, the master of the early 1900s, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Incredible book. I still recommend it.
Me too. I read it. I go and remind it. It's a lot of the jelly bean concepts are in there.
I have not reread it.
Gratitude.
Since for about 5 or 10 years. That's a really good thought.
Yeah.
You'll obviously be familiar with Napoleon Hill, and he wrote The Master Key to Riches and Think and Grow Rich. Which a lot of the stuff, they were the grandfathers of most of the self-improvement books. Very dense, very heavy text to get your way through. I learned how he wrote them, and I didn't know this. So he, in the late 1800s, followed lay preachers around the United States. Lay preachers were people that went to the frontier towns that had no church. And he watched and observed the sermons that made the most money for these lay preachers. And then he captured them and he put them into a book and he sold them in a book. And that was the Master Key to Riches.
Yep.
Lay preachers talking to townsfolk about God and about making money and about influence and about masterminds and about all these other things. A really fascinating story. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that's a passion point for you that you'd like to talk about today? We've covered so much ground, Linda.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting that you say that, because I'm highly AD. So everyone says when you write a book, you have to write a table of contents, and I couldn't do that. So that's partly why I did my experiment, because literally what I've done for 4 years is speak and watch what has impact, and refine it and refine it and refine it till I can get the metaphors that people can understand it. Because I can remember when I met Greg Kidd when he came out from America, and I said it's like listening to a Martian speak. I don't understand a word that you're saying, but I like the outcomes. And that's what I sort of think about entrepreneurialism, is that it is a different language. and you have to learn that language. And how do you understand how to get into that space? And so that's sort of one of my current quests, is how do I connect in a way that I can really enable people? I wish that I'd met someone like me when I was 20 years old. I can't imagine where I would have got to in life. And that got to in life in terms of being able to fulfill my own quests faster. So, so that's what I'm about. I'm a practitioner. I'm always about breaking my own boundaries, my own boxes, how to build bigger things, but how to take what Bill Campbell did and frame it up in a way that more people can have access to.
Yeah.
You know?
The parting question I always have for guests, and this is the imagination piece, is in the alternate universe where there is another Linda Jenkinson that didn't end up being a very successful entrepreneur and philanthropist and now educator and inspirer of people, and had a career that was a different career that would be deeply satisfying to her. What would that career have been?
It's funny, I get asked this question. I've been asked this question recently, and I found it really challenging because I feel like this is my life quest. I think, but if I would have, it's really interesting. They had the, Edmund Hillary Fellowship conference here a few weeks ago, which I went to. And it's a great American man, and his expertise is building the launch craft for, the on-land launch craft.
For space?
For the moon and Mars. I don't know how you get that expertise, but he's building them for everyone. Absolutely fascinating. So I think if in another world, I would have loved to have been, I would like to be, a NASA engineer. I'd like to be, building the underground world of Mars, or, doing something like that,
Okay.
Yeah.
So another form of frontier.
It's
but
right.
Not a business one. So, yeah.
Well, it's sort of, I think I sort of see everything as business ultimately, but being really research based. But I think, that would have been really inspiring. Really, I'd like to say that I'm the expert in the world of building moon launches or something.
Yeah. Cool. I love this. Yeah. Linda, what a rich and varied conversation. You've been so generous with your experience and with the models that you've built. And there's been so many teaching moments, which I know that the audience will love. And so I'm very grateful that you took the time out of your schedule to come and speak to us today. Linda Jenkinson, search, you can sign up for her newsletters and you can sign up for the upcoming book. And when it comes out in around about May, you participate in that as well. So Linda, I thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoy these episodes, I hope you do. I love filming them, and the guests always say what a great and often cathartic experience it is for them. Then please do like and share. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm open to connect requests, and occasionally get emails from people as well asking me about my experience around certain subjects. So please do like and share and continue to follow the show. I really appreciate your ears.